Welcome to The Bench, where WA's politicians get to take a breather and tell us about what makes them tick. Hi, I'm Peter Klinger from Cannings Purple, and joining us on the bench today is Martin Aldridge, the Nationals Upper House member for the Agriculture region. Martin, thanks for joining us on the bench today.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Let me start with a bit about you, the farmer's son from Gingin. Tell us a bit about Martin Aldridge.
Well, I'm 36, got a loving family, 3 young kids, and live in Gingin, which I think is the centre of the universe, and enjoy being a Member of Parliament.
When Parliament doesn't sit, are you still living on the family farm, or do you live in town?
No, we live in town now, only nice and close to the school for the kids, but grew up my whole life on farms in the wheat belt in Merredin and in Gingin, so my mum and dad have retired now and have moved to town as well.
Yeah. What do you do before you decided to enter politics?
Well, I guess the first and natural choice was to go farming like mum and dad, and I did that for probably a year or two before realising that I wanted to do something else. And I actually did 7 or 8 years as a career firefighter in the fire service here in Perth. So that was kind of my intermission between farm and politics, really.
Did you ever feature in the firefighters calendar?
No, certainly not. That was never an ambition of mine, but plenty of my mates in the fire brigade would spend long hours making sure that they were ready for the calendar.
So how did the Central Midland Senior High School head boy end up, and turned firefighter, end up in politics? I mean, what was sort of the defining moment on that journey?
Yeah, I think it was, unlike some people who say, oh, I always wanted to do something in public life, you know, whether it be on the local council or in politics, I think my journey was evolutionary, and I think my involvement in politics was accidental, and a guy from the bush was looking for opportunities to get more involved in the community, and there was an avenue locally to do that through politics, and it wasn't until Murray Criddle, who was a former member for the Agriculture region, tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I'd ever consider running, which I hadn't, and I think that's really what sparked my interest, and I guess he supported me through that journey, and here I am.
Martin, how long did it take from that sort of initial Murray tapping you on the shoulder to Martin saying, thinking it through, saying, yeah, that's the way to go? I mean, was that sort of like an instant, oh, that's a great idea, or did it take a long time to convince yourself that this was worth pursuing? I think it was probably having the confidence to do it was probably my challenge. I think other people probably have too much confidence and think that they can conquer anything and everything, whereas I think mine was knowing that I had the confidence and the ability to have a good crack at it. And certainly I was only young when I ran for my first pre-selection. I was in my 20s, and I got pre-selected, obviously not in a winnable position. That was the 2008 election, and then came back in 2013 and got elected. And how's life as an MP turned out for you? Is it as you imagined?
Yeah, well, I guess I had the benefit of working in politics for 2 to 3 years before getting elected, so I often see new members come into the place and into the parliament and see that transition a bit more difficult for them, whereas I think I had a bit of an idea of how government worked, the bureaucracy, how a lot of people get frustrated by the speed at which things move. I think I was more accustomed to that, having had a bit of involvement beforehand.
I've got to ask, of course, the politician from Gingin, from the bush, why do Perth people not get the bush?
I think that's an issue that's probably stood the test of time. I don't think it's something new.
Do you think it can be fixed? I mean, is it an education thing? Is it a generational thing? When you say it's stood the test of time.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should never stop trying to do, at least narrowing the divide on some of those issues and that understanding. I mean, it wouldn't be too many city people who don't have country cousins, but that's probably getting harder and harder these days as we see an explosion in population here in Perth. And the regions are still growing, just not as fast as Perth. So I think it is something that's important. It's particularly important for our agricultural producers that we keep that connect between consumers and producers.
Yeah. You're the first Upper House member to join us on the bench here. Is it true that members of the Legislative Council are more intelligent than of the Assembly?
Yeah, this has been a long battle. We talk about comedy between the houses, and so I'll try not to be too disrespectful. But
No, and
I think
all
we
jokes
have,
aside, I mean, how important in your mind is it to have
Yeah.
that sort of two-tiered parliamentary system?
I think it's very important. I mean, I think that you need to have a bicameral system. I think it's not only been stood the test of time in terms of the Westminster system of democracy, but it's really important. Both houses have different functions. I mean, obviously the upper house has a particular role to scrutinise particularly legislation, and I think it does a particularly good job of that. And I can fully appreciate that lower house members have a different expectation from their constituents and their communities than what upper house members do. So I don't think you can have one and not the other. But often there is a bit of a healthy tension between the houses.
And of course, there's often feedback that the upper house is a bit of a roadblock to getting anything passed, full stop. Do you think that sometimes the role of the upper house is that there's too much emphasis on the upper house, and that there's maybe too much power vested in the upper house?
I think that's always an argument that's made by the government of the day, no matter what persuasion they might be, because obviously they've got the numbers to win the majority on the floor of the Assembly, and they feel they have the right to do the same in the council. But my experience in the council is that rarely do you see politics push away good policy. I think that although we come from, I think there's 7 parties now represented in the upper house, by and large, most legislation is supported. And where there is negotiation around legislation or regulations in the upper house, I think that always ends in a better outcome. And there's often legislation that we receive in the upper house that I think is better when it leaves than when it first arrived.
You've been described as a stickler for process or for rules. Is that a fair call?
I think my colleagues would agree. But I think that's to my advantage. We live in a system of parliament and government where it is very rules and standing order and process driven, and so I think the only way to, I guess, achieve an outcome or manipulate that system is to actually have an understanding of those things.
I mean, it's a vast area. How do you tell us about some of the challenges, of getting around, and also making sure that the interests of the various parts are fairly represented?
Yeah, it's impossible, really. I mean, the most common question I get from voters I meet for the first time is, who are you and where have you been? And then you sort of explain to them that you've got almost 300,000 square kilometres from Kalbarri to Esperance, and only 365 days in a year, and you can only be so many places at so many times. But still, communities have an expectation that you're there, understand their issue, and are batting for them. We have to obviously be a bit smarter about how we do that. And fortunately for us in the Nats, in that region there's 5 upper and lower house members, so we can actually work as a team and try and cover as many bases as we can.
What would you identify as the 4 top priorities or areas of concern for your electorate?
Yeah, well, I think it's so varied. I mean, I live in the very close to Perth, in Gingin, which is almost an outer suburb of Perth these days. And then you go out to places like Muckenbudden or Esperance and even out into Southern Cross. I think the overarching issue is always equity. Equity in regional infrastructure and regional services. And often country people aren't very good at actually fighting for those things. Sometimes it's easier to accept the standard that they have rather than fight for something else. But I think beneath that, I mean, the old chestnuts of health and education. Brendan Gwills always used to say, people don't leave country towns because their roads are no good, they leave because of health and education. And I think that's really true of so many places in my electorate.
So the government's just released the John Langland report, of course, and the report made very clear that royalties for regions have run their course. Do you agree?
Well, it's no surprise. I think I could have put some money on that recommendation at the beginning. Royalties for regions was supported only by the National Party in 2008 when we went to the election. It would appear now that it's still only us holding steadfast to the policy commitment. It was interesting that John Langland was chosen, and he was somebody who actually had the pleasure of meeting in our party room when he was convincing us to cost shift royalties for regions. And we were at that time in government, and we defended that quite stridently, that was not what royalties for regions was about. Obviously the Labor government has picked up his recommendation because we're seeing almost 40% of the fund cost shifted. But I don't accept many of the recommendations in the report because I live in those communities and I've seen the difference and I know what my constituents tell me about royalties for regions. And whenever you hear talkback radio on this issue, there's no shortage of people calling in to tell, particularly the ABC, what a difference royalties for regions has made in their lives.
But that gets back to our old argument about people in Perth not getting the people in the bush, and possibly vice versa.
With the reason why you need a regional development fund like Royalties for Regions is pure arithmetic, and we talk about arithmetic in politics. The overwhelming number of our members of parliament are Perth focused, and they are focused quite rightly on their electorates. And so we needed a circuit breaker in regional WA like Royalties for Regions because it's so hard to get those issues to rise to the top in the modern politic. And so I think while there'll be changes made to Royalties for Regions, and we were making changes to Royalties for Regions in government, certainly getting it more focused around driving the economic outcomes that we need in the regions, I think that it will be something that we certainly remain committed to going into the next election.
You've already touched on how big an area you have to cover, but can you sort of highlight 3 or 4 key development opportunities that you believe would make a huge difference to your people?
Yeah, so I guess my electorate is called the agricultural region, so the predominant industry is agriculture, and I think there's some really exciting intensive agricultural opportunities now and into the future, particularly around intensive farming and irrigation and horticulture, particularly in that northern corridor in the Central Midlands region. I think beyond that, tourism is really a good opportunity, and just a lot of my electorate borders Perth, so you're seeing that sort of peri-urban drift into my electorate. A lot of people who are now deciding to live in places like Gingin or 2J or the coast, and commuting into the city or having a closer connection to the city. So we're seeing a lot of people move into those areas, so I think that's also a good opportunity. The other big one is aged care. If we can get an aged care model right for regional Western Australia, that's big employers. I mean, some of the numbers I've seen is 1.6 staff to every person in residential care. Certainly in some of our wheatbelt communities where people want to stay and live in their community in their older years, I think that's a really good opportunity if we can get government flexible enough to make those decisions.
We'll have to talk about the elephant in the room. It's been a pretty tough month for the Nationals, both in the state and also federally. How do you move forward as a party?
I think the National Party has a history of making some hard but right decisions, and it often affects us more because we are small. We're close-knit, we're often referred to as a family, which can have positive and negative connotations. But I think we've got a new leadership team in Canberra, a new ministry, an election looming. I think that the last few weeks haven't been pleasant for anyone involved, but I think we actually have a way of moving forward now with a new team.
Speaking of family, Martin, how do you relax with 3 young kids?
Yeah, certainly not with my 3 young kids. I find it quite therapeutic to mow the lawn, but finding time to mow the lawn these days is getting harder and harder. But yeah, relaxing time is usually the 2 weeks after Christmas, when everyone goes on holidays, including the media and your constituents, and everyone's got a different focus. This year was a bit different, obviously, with the education cuts and the campaign that ramped up around those. But often trying to spend as much time with my family and try and stop my house looking like it's been abandoned.
You're a former firefighter, so obviously have been and continue to be quite a fit person. Do you play sport, or what's sort of your
No.
sporting pursuits?
I'm a hopeless sports person. I think it goes back to primary school when I went and signed up to the local cricket club and got hit in the head by the ball in my first training session, and I think that was the end of my sports career. So my sport is politics, and I love engaging in politics.
Are you winning in politics?
Well, it depends how you define winning. I think in government, I think we were making a real difference, and I think in opposition we're making a real difference. And while I have that view, I'm enjoying doing what I'm doing.
What's your favourite place in WA?
Well, I think there's no place like home when I can get there, but we've got a caravan and a young family, and we like just going out and spending time in the wheatbelt, going to the Coolum bush races, maybe out to the coast. Every couple of years we go to Shark Bay. We just like doing those sorts of things with the kids.
Fantastic. Where would you like to see yourself, or where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
I have absolutely no idea. Maybe still doing what I'm doing if I'm enjoying it and I feel like I'm still making a contribution. I've always said that I don't feel like I want to be a member of parliament forever. I don't feel like I want to be a career politician, although somebody might look back in 10 years' time and remind me of those words. But I hope that I'm still enjoying what I'm doing and maybe still making a difference at a state level, or I may have moved into something. But I think I think that I get most of my work satisfaction from doing something for the community. So I think if it's not politics, it'll be something community focused.
Fair enough, Martin. Before I let you go back to representing and looking after the interests of the good burghers of the agricultural region, just want to do some word associations with you in the fast and furious minute. Parliament.
Surreal.
Constituents.
Important.
Elections.
Exciting.
Lunch.
Inconvenient.
Upper House.
Superior.
GST.
Flawed.
Mia Davies.
Dynamic.
Michael McCormack.
Future.
Mark McGowan.
Temporary, I hope.
Mike Nahan.
Opposition.
The media.
Essential.
Twitter.
Time wasting.
Wheat.
Money.
NBN.
Speed.
Fremantle Dockers.
Perseverance.
Martin Aldridge, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us on the bench.
Thanks, Peter.